always get such a kick out of hearing that tune because it means it's time for another episode of the Rec Poker Hot Podcast. And I'm the luckiest guy in the world that gets to host this show every week. My name is Jim Reed. I'm Bluffsterini in the home game, but you can find out more about me and everyone else of the Wrecking Crew by going to rec.poker/crew. And I'd encourage you to do that. That's where all the fun folks are hanging out. You can learn about folks like the one and only Dara O'Kearney, but also John Somsky, Rob Washam, Kim Kilroy. And we also love it when our premium members like Troy Chapman come and join us in the podcast, and we get to ask questions of these poker luminaries that grace our podcast with their time from time to time. So I got to thank our sponsors, Website Amp and Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. And I got to thank all our Wrecking Crew members who make this such a pleasure every week. So we got a couple in the room here tonight. John Somsky, why don't you lead us off?
My name is John Somsky, and I am Poker Geek MN everywhere.
And I'm Kim Kilroy. I am Fergie56 in the home game and PetVat33 everywhere else.
And I'm Rob Washam, and I'm Rabman50 almost everywhere.
And yeah, I want to thank, like I said, our premium members who really make this happen for us all here. Pledging $15 a month really helps us keep the lights on. It makes it easier for us to keep the website going, defrays our operational costs, and of course, just gives us all more time to be here talking with you. So I just want to shout out Robert Waters, who's been a premium member for a while. Robert, thank you so much for your support. Even though we haven't got a chance to see much of you in the strategy conversation. So I really appreciate that you're just supporting us with your premium membership. And then also folks like Joe Koulis, who's a new premium member, who's been diving right in. We had a couple fun conversations in the forums, and I can't wait to get to know Joe more as he's actively enjoying our content. Some of the great training content we put out here is based around the monthly theme that Chris Jones puts together every month. The theme this month was ICM and final tables. And we thought, do we know anyone in the poker world who can speak authoritatively about ICM and final tables? Like, wait a second, it's our favorite Irishman, Dara O'Kearney. Let's get Dara back on the show. Dara works on our seminar every month. He is a big friend of the show here. Dara, thank you so much for coming back on the Rec Poker Podcast.
Always a pleasure to talk to you fine people. I'm honored to be back.
And I believe him when he says that. I've heard him talk to other podcast hosts, and he's very plain with them about his feelings. So it's really, we're in privileged company here. Thank you, Dara, for saying that. Now we're getting you in the middle of, we were talking a little beforehand. Is this the Norwegian, to say it again,
the Norwegian Poker Championships.
Okay. And they're playing it in Ireland, which is why you're playing. So talk a little bit about what this experience is like here. Why are they doing that?
Yeah, it's interesting. The history of this is that, live poker used to be against the law essentially in Norway, but Norway is a fairly poker mad country. They have a lot of online players, but they also like to play live. So they instigated the Norwegian Poker Championships, but they weren't able to hold them in Norway. So they held them in different places every year. I remember one year at the start of my career, it was in Dusseldon in Nottingham in England. Another year it was in Riga. Another year it was in Malta. And then about 10 years ago, they came to Ireland to try to see what Ireland was like. And they enjoyed it so much that they decided, right, from now on, we're just going to have it in Ireland. And it's been back every year since, apart from the pandemic, obviously. And even though they do actually now have live poker in Norway, they still come over to Ireland for the Norwegian Poker Championships because it's become a sort of an annual pilgrimage. And the two communities, the Irish poker community and the Norwegian poker community, they gel very well together. They have very, very similar values. I think they just enjoy the social aspect of the game. They enjoy a friendly, relaxed atmosphere where everybody's drinking and having fun. So the Irish love when the Norwegians come over. We have it just before the Irish Poker Open in the same venue. So essentially it's like one big super festival. The first half of it is the Norwegians and the second half is the Irish Open.
That's awesome. And I know the Irish Open gets rave reviews here, even amongst recreational poker players. I know we send a big North American contingent every year, including our super fan here, Kim Kilroy, who's always talking about how much she enjoys the Irish Open. I think she had a pretty good result there a few years ago as well. So that helps. That helps a little. So you were saying like something about the quality of the game. You just think Irish players and Norwegian players are just sort of like disposed towards poker and towards like the social element of it. I think that's great. That's why we love those folks so much.
Yeah, I was talking to a Norwegian about this, and he, the Norwegian Poker Championships apparently are the biggest national championships in terms of the number of people they get, number of unique people they get. They typically get 1,500 unique players in every Norwegian Poker Championship main event. Which is pretty incredible because the population of Norway is only roughly a little bit over 5 million, which is approximately the same as the Irish population. And we probably have an equivalent number of players. Both countries are pretty much poker mad. It kind of shows like Ireland definitely punches above its weight in the poker world. People are often quite surprised to find just how low our population actually is, because we do make quite a lot of noise in the poker scene. And the Irish Open, as you said, it's the oldest tournament in Europe. It's still one of the most prestigious, and it has a particular sort of vibe to it where the emphasis is more on the recreational experience and everybody having a good time, rather than anything else.
I love that. And obviously that's right up our alley over here at rec.poker. I'd love to just a bit of a tangent, but so what are some of the ways that a poker venue or a poker tour or a poker series can feel more in that way? Like what are some of the actual differences that they might make strategically to be more friendly or more recreational friendly in that way?
Yeah, I think maybe the big one that the Norwegians spotted when they came over to Ireland, as opposed to the other countries they'd been in, is that if you go to most European countries, if you want to have a poker tournament, you have to have it in a casino. You're not allowed to have it outside a casino, and there are quite strict regulations. And you have to show ID to get in, and you have to. There are often security checks to get in, etc., etc. So it feels a little bit daunting. It feels like you're going into a sort of a closed environment or whatever. Whereas in Ireland, poker tournaments just take place in a hotel. You just walk in off the street. There's no security. Like you're not frisked before you go in or anything. There's no ID card you have to show to get into the room. Anybody can walk in. And that might seem like a minor thing, but I think it does sort of set the tone for it's just an easygoing festival. Similarly, everybody's allowed to drink at the table. You don't have to go to a special bar or anything. And that sort of creates the convivial atmosphere as well. Norman Shadd actually came to the Norwegians one year when they were in Ireland, and he was stunned by the amount of alcohol both the Irish and the Norwegians were consuming. And he wrote a very funny line. He said that there's more drink spilled on the carpet at the Irish and Norwegian championships than is consumed at the entire WSOP, which might be a slight exaggeration, but only slight. And I think also just the sort of Irish attitude towards poker is that it's a social occasion. It's not to be taken too seriously. There are some countries in Europe where you go and you feel like nobody's having any fun. Everything is hyper competitive and people are, squaring up to each other and everything. Whereas in Ireland, it's part of the general culture that goes back centuries, where people just got together for whether it was card playing or storytelling or whatever. And the emphasis was more on the social aspect and the company rather than the actual activity.
Well, good poker players are good storytellers, and they're good at understanding when they're being told a story that doesn't make sense, right? So I know there's a great, the Irish people have a great lineage of storytellers and an oral history, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if that had something to do with it culturally as well. So you are so prolific in the poker world. You've got your own podcast. You're a book writer. You're playing professionally. What have you been working on recently? And just that, like, what are you having fun with in poker these days?
Yeah, well, I guess the biggest change for me in the last few months is that live poker is now back with a vengeance over here. Having played almost no live poker for 2 years, short trip to the WSOP notwithstanding, suddenly now it seems like everybody who runs a poker tournament in Ireland at any time of the year wants to have their tournament right now, because the restrictions have just been lifted. So we've already had a few festivals. Now we're into the Norwegians and the Irish Open, and then we have a short break before the Dublin Poker Festival starts. The centerpiece of that is a tournament called the European Deep Stack, which holds a fond place in my heart because the very first running of that back in 2008 was my first major live tournament, and I ended up winning it. So that kind of got me started on the whole poker scene here. And then after that, we're going to have another festival, a Poker Stars Festival, I think in the middle of May. So it's going to be pretty much constant live poker from now until Vegas. And once I get to that, then the WSOP is started. So I'll be heading over there. I'm also doing a short trip to Tallinn, leaving. Let me work this out. About 24 hours from now.
Yeah, I was going to say it's right around the corner.
Yeah, 24 hours. I'm going there to do mostly to do commentary with David, the guy I do the podcast with, as you mentioned, David Lappin, on the Patrick Antonius challenge, which Unibet are involved with as well. So that's probably the thing that's been taking up most of my focus, just sort of getting back to the habit of playing live poker. And I felt really rusty at the start. It was like, oh, you mean I have to count other people's stacks now and try and figure out how many they have and divide that by the number of big blinds? I can't just click a button on the screen and it tells me this guy has 69.3 big blinds. So sort of relearning the whole process of playing live. Still working on the fourth book with Barry, and obviously still doing all the other stuff that I do, the coaching and the podcast, as you mentioned. So been very busy on all fronts, but I guess for most of the last 2 years, I've been able to do all that stuff without the diversion or distraction, whatever you want to call it, of live poker. And now there's an awful lot of live poker. But it's great to be back. Everybody, I mean, you can see just the pent up demand. People are so thrilled to be able to play live poker again in Ireland. And the atmosphere is always very friendly, but it's particularly friendly now because I think, people are not going to take it for granted anymore. Because we've had 2 years without live poker. So that absence has definitely made the heart grow fonder in this case.
Yep, I believe that. I think that's true for sure. I'll take a bit of a segue there because this is something we do talk about from time to time. You're kind of readjusting from online play to live again. You mentioned a few of those little hiccups that we can have. Have you had any like tricks or what have you, any shortcuts or little ways that you can kind of like knock some of that rust off, or is it just a question of kind of like reestablishing yourself in the live arena?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things I do. There's just a couple of routines I have at the table where I constantly monitor the stack sizes rather than suddenly finding myself in a hand against seat 4 and having no idea how many chips he has. So, I sort of on my downtime between hands, I'm constantly looking around. Also, when I'm involved in a pot, I tot up right from the start. Okay, the small blind, the big blind ante, the raise was so much, the call was so much. What's in the pot now? So that I don't have to stare blankly into the middle and try and work out from the number of chips, which is not a good policy when you're colorblind as I am, and you're just at a pile of chips going, I don't even know what those chips are. So I just have the amount fixed in my head, and then now I'm back to having to work out what's 40% of that or what's 66%. As opposed to just clicking a button online. And then remembering to do all the other stuff that you're supposed to do live, like look at the guy.
Right.
And also make sure that you know the exact 2 cards you have, suits and all. So yeah, there's a lot of sort of relearning stuff that I guess I knew, but just was out of practice with. And it's almost like, going back and learning how to do something you used to be able to do, but you can't anymore. So now you're sort of back to basics and doing this. A lot of the stuff that would have been automatic to me 2 years ago certainly isn't automatic anymore, and I am consciously having to look at stacks, tot up amounts in the pot, all that stuff.
Yeah, I think that kind of stuff takes some getting used to and some training, right? Like you have to intentionally do it. And we've talked before, different kinds of people find it difficult to kind of have that summed up in their brain the whole time. But it sounds like for you start the hand, what people's stacks are, and then that's of course sort of taking place, that's sort of taking some mental space in your mind because you'd rather do that than have to do the calculations while you're in the hand there. Yeah. Interesting. And of course, what's great about that is that then you can spend that time using your brain for other things, like you point out, looking at the guy and making some more sophisticated tells and decisions based on that. So one of the things, obviously, we've talked about before, the ICM book, end game here. So I can see you've got some very well positioned hooks in the back there. Yeah, exactly. So the theme for the month here is ICM and final tables. It's an area that a lot of recreational players find themselves in at a time when their decisions are the most expensive they're ever going to make and where they are the least prepared they're ever going to be. It's a spot that's hard to prepare for. It's a spot that I think the gap between recreational players and pro players is probably the biggest amongst other. So can you just speak a little bit to sort of that experience or what's so important about knowing ICM and why most recreational players are kind of missing out on that knowledge?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, it just makes a massive difference to your bottom line. Like you might not get into these situations where you're two or three tables out and ICM starts to become a major factor and really change the strategy all that often. I think most people have a sort of a reasonably good grasp on how maybe the strategy changes around the actual money bubble, but actually the much bigger bubble, for want of a better word, comes to as you push on towards the final table. And just in terms of like when you make what might seem like a relatively small mistake in ICM terms, it can actually just be a huge mistake in actual money terms. You know, at the start of a tournament where everybody starts with one starting stack and they've all paid their buy-in, like the biggest mistake you can make is, you know, some percentage of that buy-in. You know, somebody shoves and they accidentally reveal their hand as aces, and you look down at your hand with 7-2 off and for some reason have an insane moment and call. You know, that costs you in monetary terms 80% of a stack, 80% of the buy-in. But when you get into situations near the end of a tournament, let's say somebody shoves, and from an ICM perspective, the worst hand you're supposed to call is ace jack. Well, if you call with ace 10, that could very well be a 20 buy-in mistake. Mm-hmm. And it's just going to make a massive difference to how you do in tournaments. Similarly, if you decide to fold the ace jack, that could be a 10 to 20 buy-in mistake as well. So you really have to get those decisions right. Or at least as good as you can make them. Now, when I came up in poker almost 15 years ago now, the way most tournament players started is they started playing sit and goes, either 10-man tournaments that paid 3 or 6-man tournaments that paid 2. And when you came to that sort of training ground, you developed a very good intuitive feeling for ICM. You know, you understood that as you approached the bubble, it really ramped up, and it was important to adjust your strategy accordingly. Now, I think in the last 5 years or so, maybe 5 to 8 years, a lot of MTT players just come straight in and they just play MTTs. You know, these vast runner fields, 1,000, 2,000 runner fields on the major sites, and they might only get to, 10 final tables a year. So back in the day, we were playing 100 sit and goes, which were essentially final table simulators a day, and sort of getting a very good intuitive sense for what to do in those spots. Now these guys are making 10 final tables, and that's going to essentially define their year. If they could even improve their finishing position by one spot through understanding ICM and applying it correctly, that would make a huge difference to how they do over the year. And ICM almost became a dirty word in poker for a while. It became a sort of these are just people who fold everything and they're all obsessed with the next ladder and they'll never win tournaments, etc., etc. And that's one of the myths we tried to dispel in the book. Like, there are two sides to ICM. When you have the big stack, you should be putting the pressure on the other people. And when you have the small stack, you should be aware of how it changes your strategy. But it's not a case of just fold everything and hope somebody else busts. That's a gross up oversimplification. But it is the case that even a lot of very good players are not that familiar with ICM in recent years, which was one of the reasons we decided to write the book. Now, since we wrote the book, it seems like ICM has sort of become the buzzword again, and so many people are asking about ICM spots, and you see debates about ICM spots, and a lot of the top players are paying close attention to it again, because I think the message has got out there that it makes a huge difference to your bottom line, whether you're a recreational player or a pro. If you're a recreational player and you make one final table in your lifetime, it's really important that you don't make a big ICM mistake on that occasion. Similarly, even if you're a non-end pro who plays 20,000 tournaments a year online, if you make 100 final tables in a year, that's going to be above average. And how you do on those 100 final tables is going to largely define your year. So it's something which is very important to nail down.
Yeah. So is it the way that you talk about it? It makes me feel like understanding ICM is less about like making really excellent, aggressive. It's more about avoiding big mistakes than it is about making excellent plays. If you know what I mean, it's more about just avoiding those big mistakes that are going to take other people out of the tournament, or they're going to give up a lot of EV. So it's almost like if you're so it must be hard to kind of judge your success as a recreational player if you're like, did I make a good ICM move? It's like, well, did I avoid a big, terrible mistake? Then is that how you successfully? Is that how you just tell if you're successful or not? Like,
yeah, absolutely. I always say that poker, or at least tournament poker, is really about avoiding large mistakes. It's more like golf than a sport where you can let's say you're taking part in the long jump in the Olympics. You can do 5 rubbish jumps and not even get on the board, but if you nail the 6th jump and jump farther than anybody else, you won the competition and you are the best long jumper in the world. Golf doesn't work like that. you can't destroy every hole. You can't shoot bogey after bogey after bogey, and then because you get one hole in one at the last hole, you've won the tournament. And poker is more like that in my mind, at least tournament poker. It's about consistency, not making big mistakes. Even if you make mistakes that they shouldn't be too big, and then just generally making less mistakes than other people. I think cash games are slightly different. In a cash game, you can create your sort of own universe where, because of the way you're playing, you just frazzle other people and they do really weird stuff, and you have a better understanding of the new weird dynamic that you've created. But in tournaments, like, I often recommend some of the less experienced players that I coach that they go off and watch somebody on a final table. I say, like, this guy's one of the best players in the world, so just watch how he plays the final table. And almost invariably they come back and say, he didn't do anything out of the ordinary. He just seemed to make all the most obvious decisions. And what's so great about this guy? And I said, well, that's it. Like, he just didn't make any mistakes. That's kind of the point. If when I think back to World Series main event final tables, I think Martin Jakobsen's amazing performance the year he won. And again, it was just a case of he didn't make any mistakes. He didn't do any incredible out of the box bluffs or amazing hero calls or any of that stuff. He just played incredibly solid poker and made less mistakes than everybody else at the table. And I think that is the essence of tournament poker. It's not about brilliancies or the eye-catching plays. It's just about constantly making the best possible decisions.
And that must be especially true for the fields that we're playing in as recreational players, where the mistakes that the player pool are going to make are much bigger, are much more frequent. That really, most tournaments that are exclusively played by recreational players are going to be a question of kind of like outlasting the other mistake makers until there's only one left, right? I mean, that's the only way I ever win any poker tournaments. Just save all my mistakes till I've already won the tournament. But and obviously the mistakes that you make when the pay jumps are the biggest are the most expensive mistakes that you make. So you've written this book specifically around this topic. What were some of how did you kind of approach it from how can we get this into the words that an outsider is going to understand when it comes to, like, how can we make an outsider feel the knowledge of ICM coming to in an applicable way?
Yeah. I mean, the one thing we didn't want to do is we didn't want to have lots of very technical examples and graphs and equity graphs and distribution graphs and all that stuff. What we wanted to do was we wanted to take specific examples, but use them to establish patterns or sort of actionable heuristics that people could use when they're in an ICM extreme situation. So talking about stuff like, okay, when you're coming up to the final table bubble and ICM is getting fairly extreme, how does that change your strategy? First of all, your pre-flop ranges change. How do they change? The shape of the range changes. You play more suited aces and kings, and you play less low suited connectors and low pairs. And that was reinforced by hundreds or probably even thousands of sims we ran ourselves. But we didn't just put all the sims into the book. We said, look, we've run the sims. This is how stuff typically changes. When you're the big stack, when you're the medium stack, when you're the short stack. And, you know, we talked about blind defense. You have to defend your blinds much more or much less liberally when you're under ICM pressure, because, you know, if you defend with, I don't know, king 2 off and you hit a pair, you're not going to be able to stack off if the guy covers you and ICM is extreme. So what are you trying to hit with king 2 off? You're trying to hit 2 pair, and, you know, then you might as well be calling with any 2 cards. So it was that kind of stuff. And then for post flop, it was similar. We were looking for patterns. What happens when one guy has a lot more chips than the other guy? How does that affect both of their strategies? What happens when they both have a lot of chips and now they're in a pot against each other? What happens when they're both relatively short? And how does the strategy change? So we're assuming that everybody knows how to play poker. Like, we're not teaching them how to play a flush draw or how to play jacks, everybody's favorite hand. But we are saying that, you know, the way you would normally play is the way you would normally play. But when ICM is extreme, then it changes in this way. You know, as I said, you add more suited aces to your range, your pre-flop range, more suited kings. You start dropping pairs. You start dropping a lot of the unsuited hands from your big blind defending range, et cetera, and this is why, you know, we didn't want to just list a set of rules and say do this and you'll be fine. You know, we're in the example of the king 2, we would go through and say, well, the reason why you can't defend king 2 off anymore is that you will only flop a weak pair, and you won't be able to stack off post flop against somebody who covers you and is able to apply ICM pressure. So it was all about trying to put it into terms that made sense to people, so that they'll remember the reason rather than the trying to force a series of rules into their head. The other thing we've done in all of our books is we've tried to put in as many illuminating anecdotes as possible from my own career. That's just to break up the book, but also to reinforce the concepts in people's minds. And my good friend Alex O'Brien, the science writer, is actually reading the book at the moment, and that's the thing she commented on the most. She said she didn't expect to see these stories sort of mixed into the book, and she found them really really good and illuminating. And we kind of stumbled on that by accident. We put 1 or 2 of them into the first book we wrote, Poker Satellite Strategy. And when David Lappin reviewed the first book, he said, yeah, those are a really good idea. You should actually put more of those in. So we've always made a conscious effort right at the end of the book, when we end up with, you know, this is everything we're trying to get across. And then the final pass is to go through it. And I rack my brain to think if there's any anecdote or story I can put in that will illustrate the point in sort of more understandable terms, rather than just saying, well, don't do this because it's not good.
Oh, I love that. And so, yeah, and if our listeners don't know, Dara is a member of the Wrecking crew here. You can go to rec.poker/doke, and you can find out about all his work, other ways to connect with Dara. And Dara also contributes to our monthly seminar video here that Chris Jones puts together every month, where our members get together and play kind of a simulated tournament scenario. And Dara and Chris Jones break it down afterwards, which is so freaking cool, man. Our members tell me all the time how much they love the idea that you're going to look at a hand that they play and they're going to get some personalized feedback. I think that's super cool. The reason I bring it up now is because, like I said, the theme this month is final tables and ICM. And we had some hard times figuring out, okay, there's Dara's book. There's good theory out there. We can have conversations about ICM and how to play final tables differently. But how can we practice this? Or like, how can we drill? Or like, other than gaining knowledge, have you had any insight into this, Dara? It's a hard thing to practice, to like playing shorthanded with ICM implications. Yeah. How can we practice that?
Yeah, it is very hard. Like, traditionally, my approach has been to just run a lot of sims in Hold'em Resources Calculator, the preflop tool, and more recently the the post-flop tools like PO have become ICM aware as well. So you can look at spots too. And that was actually a lot of the work for the latest book, me just running all those as soon as PO became ICM aware. I think now there are more and more tools coming on the market, which are essentially trainers. So they have all the pre-solved ranges built into the software, and they give you situations you can practice, like button against big blind, 40 big blinds deep, where ICM is fairly extreme, or chip leader against short stack, etc., etc. So tools like DTO now, which are essentially trainers, I think that's probably going to be the next phase where people just practice a lot. And rather than having to, think, okay, well, in this spot, I think this is what you're supposed to do, and run off and run a sim, and 20 minutes later they know whether that's true or not. They can maybe play 100 hands against DTO, and they'll quickly spot if they're doing something wrong. I'm overplaying top pair when I'm covered, or I'm hanging on too much in spots where I'm covered, etc., etc. So I think tools like DTO are probably the next generation of learning. And there are also, obviously, you mentioned the book. That's a reasonably good starting point. I've made a number of free videos as well. If you search for Dara O'Kearney ICM on YouTube, you'll find them. I did some coaching with Kevin Martin and Barry as well, actually. And I did produce a course on. I'm currently producing a course with Ryan LaPlante at Learn Pro Poker.
Oh yeah, he's awesome.
Which goes into a lot more detail on the ICM. So it was a case there were very few resources out there in ICM. Now there are more resources, and I think other content creators in the area, like Ben CB, are now much more interested in producing ICM content. So I think the next year or two, we're going to see a lot more ways to improve ICM, whether it's watching a series of videos by somebody like Ben on ICM, or it's using a tool like DTO to practice yourself.
Yeah, and actually, if our listeners are interested, another Rec and Crew member, Tim Fritz, does a session every Sunday, just drilling with TTO. He takes a look at a different format, and on Wednesday evenings, he also he streams live on Twitch for free, doing a DTO review session. So you can get to know Tim Fritz. If you go to rec.poker/misclick, that's Misclick Donkey, our man Tim over there, and he does a lot of work with DTO as well. Kim, did you have something there?
Yeah, no, I'm thinking that something like DTO or some sort of trainer like that would help, because I think fatigue gets to be a huge issue when you make final table after days or hours of playing, and your mind isn't as sharp. So if you've got that sort of base of having practiced something, then that would help. I found myself when the couple of times that I've been at a final table, I found that fatigue can be a huge issue. And how do I bring my brain back around to focusing on what's the best sort of ICM spot, and not just like playing on remote as I would earlier, like before ICM is an issue.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point. Rob?
Yeah. I had a quick question. So I do all this study. I get really good at ICM spots. I play a lot of MTTs to get that feel, where I'm at. Now I'm in a final table, and I got a whole bunch of amateurs that have no idea what ICM is. Give me a quick tip of how I can take advantage of that, or how I might change my strategy.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, the weird thing about ICM is that there's an advantage to not knowing anything about ICM if you're on the final table, which is that the players who know about ICM, they have to tread carefully around you, which is one of the reasons why when I'm coaching recreational players and I tell them, if you ever make a final table and somebody asks you about ICM, claim you've never heard of it and you have no idea what it is, and you certainly haven't read a book on it. And because there's a famous, I think it was the W Cup a few years ago, where a Russian guy made the final table with a bunch of absolute crushers, and he had come in from a $1 satellite all the way up to the main event, and they were trying to do a deal, and he kept typing into the chat box, "I want million," saying he basically wanted $1 million, and they all knew that he knew nothing about ICM, and they had to just play incredibly carefully around him. And they were all exploiting each other to say, well, I know this guy knows about ICM, so if I shove into him, he can't really call with anything. But they couldn't do that to this guy. So that's the first point I would say. If you do find yourself at a table where literally nobody understands ICM except you do, really the only thing you can do is sort of step back and let them all knock each other out. You can't do any of the fancy stuff anymore. You can't, raise when you're the big stack, because they know that they have to defend their blinds liberally, much more carefully. If they're going to defend their blinds with the same range and they're going to hang on with bottom pair, all of the strategies in the book are sort of out the window. You can't just apply pressure anymore. You just have to accept that this is the game now. But you do pick up a lot of equity in those spots from them just knocking each other out. And Danny Sprung sent me a very interesting thing recently when I was in Prague, and I had to think about it. He said, if you were at a final table and everybody had the same stack, but you were the only player who understood ICM, what position do you think you would come in the most often? And I had a thought about it, and you definitely win the tournament less often than the other players, assuming they have the same skill as you, apart from the fact that they know nothing about ICM. So if it were a cash game, they were all equally skilled. So you would win less often, but you would also come ninth less often. So that was my starting point. And I thought, well, okay, if you're coming first and ninth less often, you're also coming second and eighth less often, because when you get to eighth, you're going to be the highest and the lowest in that. So you're probably going to come fourth or fifth more often, but you are still going to make more money in the long term than all the other players, because your distribution will see to that. But that's a theoretical example. In the real world, you're not going to find 8 players on a final table who understand nothing about ICM but are as good as you in every other way. Players who don't understand ICM will have other leaks as well. They will make other mistakes. So that, I would say, focus on that. Focus on the kind of mistakes they make and how you can exploit those, rather than worrying too much about, well, now I'm not going to be able to use all my wonderful ICM knowledge to push them around. And as I said, do step back and just let them knock each other out. There was a very graphic illustration of this right at the start of my career. I used to play in a club in Dublin called the Fitzwilliam, and I made a final table there, and I was by far the shortest stack, and there was a huge chip leader. And for some reason, everybody else on the table decided they were going to take on the chip leader, with a result that I got heads up without ever playing a hand on the final table, with less chips than I started with. But that's basically the exploit. Just like sit back and let the other people burn money, burn their equity, and you'll be the recipient of that.
Yeah, let them make the bigger mistakes, right? Just like we were talking about. Troy, did you have a question there?
No, it was a similar sort of question. Like, I just came out of a series, Dara, down here in Australia, where I would argue that the majority of the people thought ICM was a new pharmaceutical. So I was lucky enough to make 3 final tables, and nice. The stuff that I seen in the lead up to it, I was going to ask very similar questions to what Rob was talking about there. But how do you start identifying people who actually have a bit of an idea about ICM? Because like in the lead up, I almost went over and took a selfie with a guy who, on the bubble for the cash, we watched 2 guys who were almost chip leaders collide and have like a million big blinds in the middle. And every short stack got up and almost wanted a selfie with the bloke because everyone suddenly got paid. And so you realise that some of these people just have no clue. And they're just obviously recreational players who do not study, which is perfectly fine. Yeah. But how do you then identify the guys around the table who start doing that fairly quickly? Because at a rec game, I might not play with those guys live ever again, or I've even started travelling for poker lately, and so I might travel interstate and not know anyone there. Do you have any tips for being able to identify some of the dudes who are at least a little bit cluier about how ICM works, apart from the obvious where 2 big stacks collide?
Yeah, I mean, it is difficult because, as you say, like it's usually the outlier where somebody does something really bad, and you go, okay, well, that person just doesn't understand ICM. And when I played satellites in particular, where ICM is really the most important skill by a country mile, the only note or tag I ever put on players was a tag which indicated this person doesn't understand ICM, because that was the only thing that really had a massive impact on how I would play them if I ran into them in the future and didn't remember that about them. So that's point number one. If they make a massive mistake, you can immediately tag them. You'll sometimes get a sense from just the way they talk as well. There are certain phrases that people who are not ICM aware use. They talk about, playing for the win, or and sometimes they'll discuss a hand and they'll sort of betray the fact that they were just completely on ICM aware in that spot. One thing David Lappin does in those fields, which is a little bit sneaky, but he'll sometimes, it'll fall round to on the button and he looks down at 7 deuce off, so he has no decision, and then he'll eventually fold, and people will say, well, what were we thinking about? And he'll say something ridiculous like, oh, I had ace queen there, but I didn't think that was strong enough to shove. And immediately people, sometimes at the tip, people will go like, that's clearly a shove. So now you know that those guys are ICM aware. And if somebody else goes like, oh yeah, I guess you need ace king there, which is clearly wrong, you'll know, first of all, they're probably not ICM aware, but also the way in which you would exploit them, they're actually too tight. They think ICM makes you tighter than it should be. So you can use tricks like that. Generally, by talking to people, you will get a sense, but you have to be careful too. Obviously, people can fool you as well. People can pretend they know nothing about ICM, but they actually do. And as I said, it is to your advantage if the other players think you don't understand ICM, because they'll stop shoving into your blinds, then thinking you might make a bad call, or they just have to play much more carefully and honestly against you. So it is very difficult for sure. I mean, sometimes by their track record as well. Like if you hand a mob a guy and he has an incredibly impressive record, then there's a good chance he is ICM aware. If you hand a mob a guy who has made a lot of final tables but keeps coming 7th or 8th, there's a decent chance he doesn't. He's not that ICM aware. And even like some pros I know are in that category. I would say that probably the biggest flaw they have is they're not ICM aware, so they don't play final tables very well, and that does tend to be borne out by their record. They don't finish top 3 very often, and they tend to come 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th a lot because they have this wrong idea that you kind of have to go mental aggressive from the start of a final table and try and run it over. And more often than not, that results in 8th place, or that results in 8th or 7th place more often than it actually results in everything going right for them and them winning.
So one thing, and I know we're going to let you go here because you're at the end of a long day of grinding live in the Norwegian Championship. So for recreational players that are unfamiliar with ICM final table play, the one point that seems to be consistently driven home by every time we talk about this is the most important thing is stack size. What are the stack sizes at the table? What is your stack size relative to the lower small stacks and the big stacks? Is it just that simple, or is there something else that's kind of equally important if someone was just getting into this with their own mind?
Yeah, that is extreme importance. Also, the payout structure is important, and this is something that people often get back to front. They often think if the payout structure is very top heavy, in other words, the jumps are quite big, that means the ICM is big, and if the payout structure is flat, ICM is less of a factor. It's actually the other way around. The flatter the payout structure is, the more extreme the ICM is. And the easiest way to realize that is that the most extreme ICM situation is a satellite where there are no pay jumps apart from the first one. If there are 10 prizes, they're all of equal value. So there's a huge jump from 11th to 10th, but then there's nothing after that. Whereas in a very top heavy payout structure, ICM is less of a factor. And events like the World Series main event have moved towards a more top heavy payout structure, let's say. And you have to kind of understand that does change things then. It actually makes the ICM less extreme. So after stack size, I would say payout structure is the next most important factor.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate you coming by and dropping some wisdom on us reckies over here and helping us share our love of poker with the rest of the poker world. If people do want to get in touch with you for coaching or anything else like that, what's your preferred way for folks to reach out?
Yeah, specifically for the coaching, usually the best way is just to send me an email detailing your current level and what areas you're looking to improve and what your short to medium term ambitions are for poker. Because I'm definitely not for everybody. Like there are some people, they would be better off finding another coach. But it's very important for me to have a sense of where you are and where you want to go. So if you send me an email at Doke Poker Coaching, DOKE Poker Coaching, all one word, at gmail.com. In general, probably the best place is just to hit me up on Twitter at Dara O'Kearney. I tweet out pretty much all the stuff I do there. The videos, the books, the strategy articles, et cetera. There is a landing page put together recently, which kind of details all the stuff as well. And there's a link to that from my Twitter bio. So I would say Twitter is probably the best place to follow me. I pretty much just use Twitter exclusively to sort of let people know what I'm up to in poker terms. I don't get too much involved in the constant battles over with vaccines or whatever else Ukraine or whatever else people are debating on poker Twitter that week.
Yeah.
I leave that to David Lappin. That's his bag.
Divide and conquer. There you go. Everyone's got their areas of expertise, right? David's not afraid to tell Twitter how he feels either. So that's a good fit. Right on. Well, that's great. So yeah, at Dara O'Kearney on Twitter. I know you're a lot of fun to follow there. You engage with a lot of your fans as well. So that's fantastic. Dara, thank you so much. I know you bagged a big stack of chips today. So get some sleep and go crush that field tomorrow and go win that final table, man.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it would be nice to put it into practice.
There you go. All right. Well, thank you again, Dara. And I'm already looking forward to getting Dara O'Kearney back on the show next time. We can talk about whatever new and exciting things are coming up in the world of book writing, professional poker playing, and everything else that he's got going on. A great guest and a great friend of the show. Thanks again, Dara. So, John, we are here. It is the community segment of the show. We're going to talk about home games and what's coming up in Rec Poker Land. Oh, yeah, I forgot. And again, if people want to find out more about Dara, you can go to rec.poker/doke, DOKE, and learn about why Dara is so excited to be a part of Rec Poker Nation as well. Like our home games and the other fun stuff that we do over here that you can learn more about at rec.poker. John, what's been going on in home game land this week?
Well, to start off, we had Swedish Fishy 77 Lars win his third nightly tournament for the year.
Nice.
A Big Deal 1992 Brian DeHaven got his second win of the year.
Well done.
Noah 12 with lots of H's. 1291 Noah Anderson got his first nightly victory for the year, and still on a tear, Stewie 13 Stuart Kendrick got his third nightly for the year.
Wow, he is really on a tear. He's dark horsing it for like player of the year here. I don't know how he keeps winning all these tournaments.
Yeah, that's his sixth win this year overall.
Yeah. And it's April 4th at the date of this recording. So that's pretty impressive.
Then Jakal won. James Cree won the daily mixed event.
Oh, nice. James, way to go. One of our new premium members. That's fantastic.
For international events, just a reminder, the 8 o'clock one does have to have two people registered at 8 o'clock to actually run. I'm not all that worried about. We run 40 tournaments a month, so if one of them doesn't go so people don't show up, that's fine. But for the 2 p.m. event, A Big Deal 1992, Brian DeHaven won his first international victory.
Wow. Okay, that is a big deal.
Yeah. Then a really mad guy won the LPP event. So you can contact Jim at rec.poker to get your free month at Learn Pro Poker.
Don't want to miss that chance, my man. Email me and we will set you up with a free month at Learn Pro Poker. There's a lot of great stuff going on there. You just heard Dara talking about he's doing an ICM video with Ryan LaPlante. And I'm sure that's going to be great. So go check that out and don't be shy. Let me know. Jim at rec.poker. Let me see what else. If this is coming, oh yeah, I should have mentioned this during Dara's interview as well. This interview comes out on Tuesday, April 12th. The very next day, Wednesday the 13th, our premium members are going to be joined by Steve Blay in the Focus. So every month in the Focus, we're going to look at a different training tool or software or another way to study poker. And we're going to have the developer or someone who's an expert with the program every month to come and explore it with our members. So in April, Steve Blay from Advanced Poker Training, which is a kind of a similar tool to DTO, which we were talking about just now. Advanced Poker Training is a program where you play against bots, basically, and you can program them to simulate certain player fields, there's certain villain types, that kind of thing. And then you can simulate different tournament or cash structures as well. So come on down on Wednesday the 13th, and Steve will show us how we can use Advanced Poker Training to simulate a final table and get some of this practice in that we were talking about with Dara, because it's hard to practice. It's hard to simulate this kind of thing with real situations. It just doesn't come up that often. Rob, how are we doing in the book study too? We got some fun happening over there, I think.
Yeah, we're studying beating small stakes poker tournaments. Right now, we've had one session. By the time you hear this, the second session will have gone off, which is the 6th, I believe, today, the 6th this week. And we'll probably have maybe one or two more sessions after that, and we're going to go to the next book. And there's a Twitter poll that should have finished now. And so I'll have 4 books that I'm going to put out in a Twitter poll, and I'm going to put it out probably this weekend. So by the time you hear this, you will have a few days before the poll goes off. I like to keep them going for a week. And then we'll be down to that book that we're going to study after Beating Small Stakes Poker Tournament by Jonathan Little.
That's going to be fun. I love it when we get a chance to give the members exactly what they're asking for, right? So go check out that poll and pick the next book that we're going to find some reputable studying along.
One of the interesting things is one of the top 4 books that are going to be on the next poll is Endgame Strategy by Dara O'Kearney.
How about that? I wonder if we can get him on the show.
So that could very well be the next book that we get into.
There you go. Well, with WSOP right around the corner, it's not too late. It's not too early, and it's not too late to start thinking about that kind of thing. Speaking of WSOP, if you are a premium Rec Poker member on June 1st, we're going to put your name in a hat, and then we're going to draw a name out of that big old hat. And whoever's name we pull is going to win the chance to be my partner in the tag team event number 55, the bracelet event down in the World Series of Poker. The first day of that tournament is Sunday, June 26th. So that gives you about 3 weeks from the drawing to decide if you're going to be able to make it down or not. Yeah, Troy says he'll do it via Zoom. That sounds like a good plan. I don't know. Yeah, you might. Okay, we'll talk about the logistics of that offline, Troy. But yeah, all it takes is $5 to get your first month of Rec Poker Premium membership. Come join up in the next month or two, and if you are an active member on June 1st, maybe it'll be your name that gets pulled out of the hat. We're going to buy your entry. You're going to come and play with me, and maybe we can win a bracelet for Rec Poker. How much fun would that be? The only other thing I want to tell people about is if you see John Somsky in the world, make sure that you get a photograph of you buying him a beer. If you buy John a beer between now and WSOP and document it in a photograph, I will buy you a beer when I see you down in Las Vegas. So it's a free roll. John does so much for the home games here. When he started, there was only one a month. Now there's about 40. So he puts a lot of himself out there, and he deserves a little libation every once in a while. And John, again, I'll tell you, you're welcome to substitute a tea or coffee or orange juice or something if they're getting at you too early in the morning. But I want to buy some people some beer down in Las Vegas. So I want to get some photos. I want to see it on Twitter. People buying John Somsky a beer. There's a hashtag in there somewhere. Hashtag buy John a beer. Hashtag John beer. I don't know. We'll workshop that offline. All right. Well, is there anything else that we should get into tonight, folks, or roll on out of here? It was a great conversation. I always have a good time when Dara's on the show. So I just want to thank Dara O'Kearney and, of course, our wonderful sponsors, website AMP and Running Aces Hotel, Racetrack, and Casino. Rob, Kim, and Troy, and John for coming and hanging out. Steve Fredlin for putting all this together. And, of course, you, the listeners. Talk to you again soon.